All right. We're live. Let's see. We're live on all the socials. All right. Let's get this party started. Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with my good friend Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk. Happy Monday morning to you.
Happy Monday. Happy Monday. Got a little bit of a headache today, just getting off a little cold, so you have to bear with me. I'm not as chipper as I usually am. I had a rant I was going to go off. I'm not sure if I will today because I'm just not my usual self, but I may anyway. So actually, I'm going to start with that. So I don't want to miss it. I was talking to somebody the other day about health insurance and how it's kind of a mess. And we go for our annual renewals, which is just about this time of year. And we were looking at plans, and somebody sent me a few different options. Like, oh, check out this other thing. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't understand how you guys are making money. And we got into talking, and I realized like I haven't been like pissed off about the health insurance in a while. So I thought it was a good idea to mention it. But what kind of system requires you to pay? I don't know what we're paying a year. It was like, let's say like, I don't know. Let's say it's 10 grand because my company pays, which is me, but I don't have the number offhand. But I'm paying 10 grand a year. Let's say I don't know what the number is, and for that, I get the right to pay up to $7,000 or $8,000 a year out of my pocket, and after that, then they take care of it. It's kind of like I remember when we had kids, we had similar setup. And when we had kids, for some reason, our healthcare costs for the year just went up to that deductible. Didn't go over. I was like, really? Having a kid isn't that expensive? It's like, no, it brought up right to that level. So I was still paying everything out of pocket. So I'm paying out of pocket, and I'm also paying the health insurance monthly cost. And I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what it sounds like to me? It sounds like I own a home and I'm getting homeowners insurance, which covers changing light bulbs. It covers washing the floor, but I have to pay for all that out of the pocket, but I got to pay someone for the right to pay for that out of pocket. But if I wash the floor 3 times a month instead of 2, well, now they're going to cover me. Like, what is wrong with this stupid system? That's the way things go. That's how it equates. I mean, I'm paying people for the right to cover it myself anyway. I don't know. I just get so infuriated every time I think about the fact. Yes, I know it covers the big cost, but you know what? When I was younger, my dad, who was an attorney, he had his own practice. It was just him, and he had catastrophic health care, and he paid like $1,000 a year or something like that, or whatever it was, and he paid it for everything out of pocket, and then if something major actually happened, it would get covered. But back then, major things didn't happen all that often. Now I feel like they happen all the time, and people get taken to the cleaners through the healthcare system. But anyway, that's my rant for the day. I'm over it because I don't have enough energy to keep it going. But it still just ticks me off every time I think about it, because it's so broken, and I'm paying so much money and I don't really use it that much. And the stuff that I want to use it for, it doesn't even cover. It doesn't cover like vitamins, stuff like preventative care. It doesn't cover like, doing quarterly blood tests just to check my markers. I don't need it. It's just for, data points and to make sure that, I'm in line, stuff like that. It doesn't cover any of that. It just covers if I go to the doctor and I have a problem. Like, all right. Anyway.
Can I add to your rant, Kirk?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Please do. Please do. Because you take some of this energy that I'm losing right now.
So I'll tell you a couple things. So first of all, when I started my business, I no longer had insurance. So I have 4 kids. You know how much we were paying for this insurance that gave us the right to cover the first $7,000 or $8,000 of expenses? It was between $25,000 and $30,000 a year for the insurance. My wife got a job that took her back into the corporate world that now it costs us, it's around 10. Like that was $20,000 of additional income just because now we're part of a company's plan instead of what was on the exchange. So that's like, just to give you an idea how the costs are crazy. And then last year I was going to have a business partner. And when we were talking about it, we were going to get key man life insurance. So they send these people out to test me to make sure I can get the insurance. And I get a blood test. And later on, I had to go to a doctor. And I said, well, I don't need a blood test because I just had one. And I showed him the one that the insurance company gave me to give me a life insurance policy. It said, oh, they tested this, this, and this, which is above and beyond what you can get from your healthcare policy. It was like checking you for like cancer markers and other stuff. And I'm like thinking to myself, so insurance companies, they don't really want to pay anything, but yet they won't pay for this like $50 blood test that might give them the ability to fend something off and cut down their costs. Like, how does that make any sense either? So you're right. Like, we have to pay all this money before we even get our insurance coverage. But then there's stupid basic things that we could get that they don't even let you have. Like, no, you can't get that. We're not going to include that. You got a blood test. You got to pay for that yourself. Like, I don't understand that either. It's just a crazy system.
Yeah. And just for reference, I'm paying $18.50 a month for the right to have up to be covered, to pay for it out of pocket for up to $7,000 or $8,000, at which point then they'll take care of it. I mean,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny. I was, this year, so it started last summer. I decided to have a year of health, and that was kind of my thing. Is I wanted to have a year of health where I'd focus on health, because I'm hitting my 50 marker soon, and I want to have a lot of longevity. And I've been reading a lot of articles which have been really interesting that have changed my thinking around it. One was, when you're younger, you're focused on growth, focused on getting bigger, stronger, faster. Like, it's just, I played sports, so that's my mindset is always that. And then I was reading some guy who was, I think, in the 60s, and he was talking about this. He's like, there's a certain point in time, it's usually around 40, or I forget what it was, maybe it was 40. And he said you should focus more on longevity and not growth. Like, you grow up to a certain point and then you focus on longevity. It's different, right? So you focus on flex. And he actually, the article is really interesting. It goes into areas like, you want to focus on things that are going to be helpful when you're older. One is balance. One is flexibility. One is endurance. So you focus on these things, because when you get older, those are the problems, right? It's like falling is the biggest cause of death, because people fall and they never get better. They go into a hospital and then they continually have problems, like, so, or they break a hip or something. So the point is you hear about this and it was really interesting. I was like, I never thought of that. So now I've changed my thinking altogether. So I'm focusing on getting tests, which oddly enough, so I took one of my sons to do it too, because he was having some issues. So we got blood tests, and come to find out from the guy we went to that that they generally will not do fasted glucose tests. Now, if you have diabetes, and I don't, but if you do, I know enough people out there do, because they have plenty of sugar or pre-diabetes or any of that stuff. If you have that, generally speaking, they will not test you. They will not give you a fasted glucose test, which is the best way to test that, right? And I asked him, I said, why? He said, because it's an extra $5. So the insurance won't cover it. So the doctors they won't ask for a fasted. Now, you could do a fasted test, but they won't give it to you because it's $5. $5. And it gets me thinking, I'm like, well, obviously they don't care about preventative, because and the funny thing is like, if you have this score and they're like, well, it's in certain parameters. Well, what else is interesting is that if it falls within certain parameters, did you know that tests, if you go get a test, that it's done on a bell curve? It's not done on what the healthy number is. It's done on a bell curve. So if it's 1 to 100, and everyone used to, in the 70s, used to be like 1 to 10, and now everybody's 10 to 40. I'm sorry, 20 to 40. 20 to 40 is the normal range. Now, if everybody's got diabetes, that's normal. Like, what? Like, what world do we live in that's okay? But that's how the system's designed. It's kind of like something that happened, I think, in like about 10 years ago, where they started to justify fat people. So what they started to do is they started to, if you were a medium, now that was a small, right? Or like the people who were overweight weren't larges, they were mediums. And I was like, I don't know what size am I? I used to be large my whole life. Now I'm a medium. Like, what's going on? Like, I'm confused. So it's all this stuff, and I get it, because if you got 80% of your people who are buying your clothes are double XL, okay, well, maybe you need to change your standards. That's fine. I'm not mad at that, but I just think it's crazy that we're changing all our standards to justify unhealthy living. And so it's hard because, how do you know if you're unhealthy? So I went through all these blood tests, and the doctor was like, well, I know the normal range says this, but it's actually this. So he had to go through each separate one and say, well, actually it's this, actually it's this. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? So anyway, that's just I've been going through a lot of this stuff, and it's been fascinating, and I'm learning a ton. And I think I told everybody last week I just got a chili pad, which has been fascinating, and it's been a great tool for good sleep. But they need to send me some money, by the way, because I'm going to start talking about this thing every week. But anyway, so it's my year of health, and I'm focused on that, and I'm learning a ton just about longevity. And I was listening to, and then we'll get to the finance stuff. But I was listening to Pierre Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil and a few others, and a lot of them talk. And these are like the futurists. So and if you guys don't listen to futurists, you should. Because these are people like Ray Kurzweil, who I think he was on Joe Rogan, and I don't think it was the best interview. To me, it sounded like he was being a little evasive because he didn't have the information, which is fine. I mean, it is what it is. But I've always found him to be one of the smartest and spot on people with his predictions. So years ago, he wrote The Age of the Intelligent Machine and The Age of the Spiritual Machine. And then he wrote Singularity. He's written a bunch of books, but he's generally been spot on with his predictions. And he's a guy who's the front end of the curve. I think he's an advisor for Google right now, so he probably knows a lot of what's going on. But if you don't follow people like this, you're never going to know what's coming. So one interview I heard the other week was talking about the future of health. And what they were saying was just amazing. And what they said was that if you can live long enough, and that might be like 10 or 15 years, if you can live long enough, they will be able to reverse the aging process for you. So if you're 70, they might bring you down to your 40. And not only can you live forever, but they can actually reverse it. And that they're at that stage right now where they're right on the cusp of it. Now, I've heard that before, just like fusion, like free energy. We've been on the cusp of that for like 50 years. So I'm not sure I believe it. But what's interesting to me is the fact that if you focus on health and longevity, we might get to a point where people can either live forever, or you can live a lot longer, or you can even reverse your age, which I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it'll be really interesting to find out. Now, obviously people can die through, getting hit by a bus, but if you could reverse it through general means of dying, that would be really interesting. So I don't know your thoughts, Phil, but to me, my year of health has nothing to do with living forever. It has to do with just having a better quality of life for the next 100 years.
So it's really interesting to say that, because every year in January, I set my 3 words for the year. And one of mine is self-care, which kind of ties to the same thing. And another guy that I read about longevity is Peter Attia. And one of the things that he says that I tell my kids all the time is that, like, if you want to be healthy 10 years from now or 20 years from now, whatever it is, means you got to take care of yourself now, because you got to be able to get to that point. And so I always tell my kids when they see me exercising, I'm like, yeah, because I want to keep being able to do the stuff that we do together long into the future. And I have to take care of myself now so that I can do that. It's really important. Like, you have to think ahead. You can't just worry about, like, get to that point, like, oh, now it's time to get healthy. You got to think about it before you get there.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when you're younger, you don't appreciate it because you just do what you're doing, and then you have kind of an event that caused you to wake up, and you're like, oh, maybe I should start taking care of myself, right? And sometimes it's later, sometimes it's earlier, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all, and people just die because they just never had that event. But I will say, it's an interesting thought process because this ties, and I'll segue into finance and we'll talk about something else. But ultimately, this gets into finance because if you look at your finances, how long are you going to live? Right. And if you're going to live an extra 50 years you didn't account for, oh my God, what are we going to do? Right. No one has prepared for this. So, when we talk about planning, I always try to, we can't do this for everybody because the numbers are the numbers, but I always try to look at it and say, all right, what can we do to have your money last forever? And the point isn't that someday you may need it to. The point is, if you have $100,000 and you get $6,000 a year by getting a 6% treasury, let's say, and that money will last forever. Right. No, it won't because you've got inflation, all these other things. But my point is thinking in those terms. How can we make the money last forever? And so I think it's really important to think in those terms because someday you might. But if let's just say that happened, let's say the prediction of we might be able to live forever, reverse our health and all that. Well, that'll be interesting on the healthcare system, first off. And we got this Wegovy stuff that's causing people to lose all this weight. Well, that's great, but I don't know what the after effects if you stop taking it. That's a little bit, I'm not sure. But if you think about it, if we can reverse some of these effects and people live healthier, and that unburdens the system and makes things better for everybody. Or, what about you look at like Social Security, which obviously is not going to last forever. That's going to be a problem. If you think about all these different things, what are going to be the impacts, societal impacts or financial impacts for you? If you live another 100 years, how's that going to work? Right? Are you going to be able, what about inflation? What about all this stuff that could happen? So I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but you should be thinking in these terms when you're doing your planning. We're always looking at this for clients and looking at it and saying, all right, how can we think about this from many different angles, not just I plug my numbers into this spreadsheet and I got this really fancy software that's going to spit out a number. And look at this, you got a number. We don't do that. We deep water test all of it because at the end of the day, you have to understand what we call scenario-based thinking, right? Outcome-based thinking is assuming that a number is going to be a number. Oh, look at your number. You need to save this amount a month and you're going to be hunky-dory and everything will be great. I don't know if anyone recalls that term, but please don't ever use it again. I'll try not to. But anyway, but if you think about it, like how can you look at different scenarios? What if I live to 120? What if inflation's a lot higher? What if inflation's lower? What if, whatever, like you got to go through these different iterations to figure out, am I going to be okay? Because the number is never the number. Like Phil, I can predict what Phil's going to say. It's like, you predict the number. It's the only number it won't be. Right.
Yes.
So it's like, he's right. Right. It's like, you're never going to get it right. You can try to approximate and be as close as possible. Be prepared for many scenarios, but you can't always get it right. You want to tie into that, Phil, since I took your thunder?
I mean, you're right. I do say the only number it's not going to be whatever I say it was. But the other thing that kind of ties into this from a different end is if you ever read Bill Perkins wrote a book called Die with Zero. And that's trying to, like, if your goal is not to leave money to your kids or to future or whatever it may be, to try and die with nothing left. But that's really hard to do too. Like the theory behind it is really just to live your best life and do the things you want to do. But to actually be able to plan it, you don't know when you're going to go. We have no idea. You could walk down the street, be crossing the street tomorrow and get hit by a car. You could, these things with all these changes could happen. You could live to 120. We don't know when we're going to go. And there's no way that we can predict it. So I look at it when we're doing the planning, we do stress testing, right? What happens if tax rates are different than what we think? What happens if inflation is different than we think? What happens if Social Security changes? What happens if the market does worse? What happens, in terms of the long-term returns, or we have a crash? I mean, there's so many different variables. It's just impossible. Like you said, I always tell the story when I was an oil analyst, they used to ask me to predict prices, and I did. And then people would call me and ask me what my prediction was. I said, well, part of my job is to predict. So I'm going to give you a number. And now there's about one number I'm sure it's not going to be. And that's the one I just gave you, because there's all these factors that I don't have any control over and nobody does, and we can't predict. So we're just kind of making guesses and trying to do the best we can under the circumstances. And look, you do a financial plan, I can make a good argument that as soon as it's done, it's obsolete, because all the things in there, all those assumptions that we made, they're not all going to happen. So you have to know that it's got to be revised and changed and updated. And there's lots of other things that we can do to help. I mean, we can use guardrails, which are just kind of, as long as my portfolio is between value A and value B, that's what I can spend. But, and that can help too. There's lots of different tools that we can use, but we don't know the answer to any of these questions.
Phil's too honest. You don't make a good media personality, Phil. You need to be able to lie to your teeth and make stuff up on the fly. So I don't know. Maybe that's why you're not on TV, Phil.
I used to be, and that's why I'm not anymore, right?
Yeah. They need people that are a little bit more looser with their morals and their values. Anyway, let's get to the fun stuff here. So a few interesting things. So first of all, it's official. We now have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. President Trump signed that in as a executive order that they've all the Bitcoin that we've confiscated from illegal sources that have just been sitting there. We've put it on our books as a strategic reserve. Apparently, they've also kept the shit coins, and they're not going to sell them. They're not going to buy more. He was very clear. We're not going to buy more. We're not selling them. And the other thing, and I don't know what that encompasses because I don't know what's on their balance sheet for the shit coins. And if you guys don't know what shit coins are, look them up. They're just basically the cryptocurrencies that are let's say shit. But Bitcoin, I can't remember what he said, but I think they said they'd think about whether they're going to acquire more. I think that requires a lot more conversation, I would imagine. And frankly, I think if you're going to buy more, the one thing I will say is we've been strategically bad at is we tend to sell our strategic oil reserves when the prices are low, and then we buy it when it's high. And Biden did this a lot. But for those of you who think, well, you're just picking on the Democrats. No, I'm not, because I'm going to tell you that Bush, the W, did the same thing. He bought high and sold low, and most presidents have done this. And so, I know it's funny because it's supposed to be a strategic reserve, but presidents use it for political purposes. And it's really crappy that they do that, but that's generally how it's been used. So we talk about before the sovereign wealth fund that they're going to create. And it's like, that's what it's going to turn into. It's going to turn into a slush fund for politicians to do with it that they need to do. So if we have a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, they're going to be like, well, we're going to buy or we're going to sell and to move the price around. I hope they don't do that, but I can tell you at least one president will, because at some point a president will be like, well, it'll do, I know they just caught me diddling this intern, so let me just do this other thing to take the take the interest away. It's kind of like when Bill Clinton got caught and then he fired a missile at some other country. I forget what it was, the Serbia or something. He sent some missiles over there to like, oh, we're going to start a war now that they caught me with Lewinsky. But anyway, the point being is it becomes a game instead of something that is more strategic, which is unfortunate because it really should be something that's there for all of our benefits, not for the politicians' benefits, which is what it'll end up coming. So I hope it doesn't become that. I do want to share. By the way, what are your thoughts before I move on to from the Bitcoin topic, Phil?
So keeping the Bitcoin that we have and not selling it as a reserve, I think that's okay. But where I start to have an issue is if we start to try to buy more, because we have this big deficit and we're trying to cut spending. Why would we then be taking money to go buy Bitcoin? I mean, that to me doesn't make intuitive sense. And I guess the other thing I always wonder about when I think about having another reserve is, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. If we start to give too much credibility, and maybe that's not the right word, but if we start to think about Bitcoin in that way, does that do something to damage the dollar? I don't know. So I guess I'm most comfortable with the idea of a Bitcoin reserve. If it's just the amount that we have, we're going to hold on to.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Something has to change with our global reserve currency status. And I think it will during Trump, because I've heard a lot of, we talked a lot about the Mar-a-Lago Accords a few weeks ago, which, if you guys haven't heard of it, please look it up. I didn't originate it. I heard it from someone else. And I think it's still being worked out in part, but I think some of the ideas are absolutely brilliant, right? If you can do it, of course. But I think it's something that, what we talked about a few weeks ago, and please go back and listen to the episode. It talks a lot about how basically we're taking all our debt and we're pushing it out like 100 years, and we're forcing our allies to take it as compensation for our defending them, and it will be 0% interest. So basically, they're floating our debt for free, and which I think is fair. If you're talking about the global reserve currency, we have a responsibility. To manage the global reserve currency as well as other currencies. So it puts us in a bad position where, we're constantly taking on debt. We can't manage it because we have to have debt out there for other people. So there's a lot of stuff like that, which I think are fascinating. And I don't know the implications. So before I get hate mail on all this, I really don't know the implications. I think it's interesting that we're being innovative. I love the fact that we're being innovative and we're thinking outside the box, because we have to. The inside the box solutions don't exist. We know that because we've talked about it ad nauseum for like the last 20 years. We cannot pay off our debt. We cannot balance our budget in the way that we are now. Our interest is too big. The interest on our debt is too big, and it's only going to get bigger. And I think we were adding $1 trillion of debt every 90 days under Biden. And at some point that goes to 80 days, then 70 days, then 60, and then we're in hyperinflation, right? So, the point being is it's a real problem. And so people who have a problem with Doge, I don't know what world you're living in. You must be living in the MSNBC world, because they're the only people stupid enough to say that that's a bad idea, cutting government debt. And frankly, I think the Democrats, and I don't mean the Democratic voters, right? I mean the Democratic Party, are completely out of touch with reality, and which is unfortunate, because they're just trying to be the anti-party and not come up with good solutions. I think we do need two parties counterbalancing each other, and I wish the Democrats would get their shit together, to come up with reasonable solutions, because right now they're just bunch of whiners. And so what I would really love to see, because if you think about what Trump's doing, like it or not, doesn't really matter. What he's doing is people are giving him ideas and he's doing it, right? He's like, okay, that's a good idea. Let's do it. Well, if you're half intelligent, so if I was a Democratic politician right now, I would be sending him tons of ideas that I like, that are common sense ideas. And I'll bet he'd implement some of them, because he's a common sense guy right now. It's like, you get a good idea. How about this? Why do we have daylight savings time? Why? Get rid of that. Like, I don't have his ear, but someone send that to him, please. Like, we have a huge incidence of heart attacks after daylight savings time because people's clocks are all screwed up. Like, why do that to ourselves? It's stupid. No one cares. There's no one on the other side of that saying we need to keep it. It's really important to our economy. Like, no one's saying that. So, if they were half intelligent, they'd step up and be like, yeah, you're right. Let's figure this out. Here's some great ideas. I mean, I'll bet if the Democratic Party got their head out of their butt and started to give common sense ideas, I'll bet some of them would be implemented, because that's what's going on right now. People are like, yeah, I think this is a good idea. Okay, yeah, I think it's a good idea too. Let's do an executive order. You have a prime period to do this right now. And so instead of all the hate of anti-Trump hate, why don't you just wake up and say, you know what? This is a really interesting opportunity. I might get heard because my ideas are really common sense ideas. Maybe I'll get heard, even though they're opposite of what the other party is. I don't know. Try it. Right? We're in an interesting period where a lot of weird stuff is happening that is outside the norm. And, like, hey, we can't pay back our debt because interest rates are too high. And the interest on the debt is going to keep making higher, and it's going to become a problem. That is an unsolvable problem in the normal parameters of how we think of the world. What we need to do is somebody to shake the box. We got a box. Everything's lined up in a certain way. We need someone to shake the box. Trump is shaking the box. He's shaking it up. Like, let's see what's in there now. Like, we need that to solve our problem. And so that's why I love the Mar-a-Lago Accord. If that happens, like I said, it's still speculation. But that's a great idea. I don't know if it'll fly. I don't know if the allies will buy it. I don't know if any of this, it might be a bad idea. I don't know. I haven't fully thought it through. But I like the fact that it's an idea, right? And we need that now because we have a lot of problems that are borderline unsolvable, right? We have an energy problem that is unsolvable at the moment, right? Clean energy, green energy is not going to solve our energy problem. We have too much energy need, and it's not cheap enough. And nuclear needs to solve that. But nuclear is going to take a long time to create nuclear energy. It takes like 10 to 20 years to get a reactor off. Well, that's 10 to 20 years from now. That's too long. What are we going to do? We're going to buy our energy from Canada? I mean, come on. They don't have enough energy either. Well, they do, but not enough for us. So we need to be thinking about what outside the box solutions can we come up with and start proposing them. Because I don't know if anyone remembers before the election, there was a website which I think it was called Policies for the People. I think that, yeah, that's what it was called, policiesforpeople.com. I don't know if it's still active, but this was a brilliant idea. I don't know if it was Kennedy or Trump who came up with it, but one of the people in his party came up with it, where they put together this website, and it was like, propose your ideas there. And it was before the election. And there were tons of people putting all these ideas. I thought it was brilliant. I mean, whoever thought of something like that? Come up with it and just like ask the people what they want. You talk about a populist who's really, and I don't mean to be so pro-Trump because this is not about politics. It's about ideas, right? Here's somebody who said, let's ask the people what they want. Oh my God, that's so cool. That's great. They talk about health, food, liberty, economy, peace. I don't know if it's still being used. Maybe it was a political piece that they just said, oh, let's get your ideas, and maybe they're never going to look at it. I don't know. But the point is, the idea was really cool. No one had ever done that before. Come up with your ideas and put them up there. We'll see if we can implement them. Cool idea. Like, why wouldn't you do that? To me, it's like, I think about it this way. It's free money. There's a pile of money sitting on the floor. You can go pick it up or you can ignore it. Well, it's just sitting there. I might as well go pick it up. That's what that was. It was free money. People are like, here's some ideas. Okay, great. You want this? Here's what I'm going to do. So here's one. I'm going to start sharing some of these. How about pennies? I don't know if I like this idea. The cost of pennies since 2001 used to cost a penny. Now it costs $3.69 to produce a penny. Does that make sense? Do we need that many pennies? Are pennies somehow disappearing? I mean, new pennies aren't. Old pennies are because they're made out of copper, and copper is now worth more than the penny, which to me is a little interesting because this is what happened with silver dollars and the quarter and the dimes and the half dollars used to be made of silver, and then I think it was 65. They started making them out of other materials, and it used to be 90-10, 90% silver. Then it went to, I think it was 70, and now there's no silver at all. But those went out of circulation because they're worth a lot more. I mean, a silver dollar is worth, I don't know, what's silver worth today, Phil? Silver is, let's see, silver's $32.91. That's a hell of a lot more than a dollar. So there's a reason why those are not in circulation anymore, because people hoard them. I have some. I kept some. You know, like you can go buy bags of silver. There was a time years ago where where you could buy a bag like by weight of coins, and it was silver dollars, whatever, and it was basically 90% silver, and you could buy it for 70% discount. Like, that's free money. Why wouldn't you buy that? Anyway, I'm getting some background noise from Phil.
I mean, the one thing that this kind of ties into too is Trump has talked about lowering interest rates, and a lot of people just connect it with housing. But you mentioned the debt, and that would have a tremendous impact upon the debt too, probably much more than the housing market, because you're right. We keep building up all this debt, and there's no way we can repay it all. And with it just compounds on a daily basis, at least lowering interest rates. I mean, they had a big chance. If you go back when we had zero interest rates, they could have issued long-term debt at really, really low rates, and that would have helped a lot, but nobody did that. So we do need to pay attention to these things and find out a way to deal with them. And I'm not all that familiar with the Mar-a-Lago Accord, so now I will read more and become more familiar with it. But our debt is a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the simple version. There's a bunch of stuff that's built in there. Tariffs is one, and some other things. The big key is that you're basically taking a huge part of our debt, and you're extending it out like 100 years, and for zero interest, and you're basically giving it. You're requiring our allies to buy it. So it'd be like, for instance, let's say you issue $1 trillion of 100-year Treasury bonds at 0% interest, and you require Germany to buy it, right? And in exchange, we will defend Germany, and they might need access to that money so they can do some sort of swaps and other things with the Treasury. That's a different thing. But basically, they'll have access to liquidity, but they need to be able to buy that because we need to extend our debt out and we need to solve our problem. And so it was interesting. It's outside the box. Like, who would do that? I'm like, well, I guess we could do that if we negotiate. I mean, Trump's a negotiator. We negotiate that deal. Okay, we're not going to defend you, but we will if you do this thing. Okay, I mean, you think about it. Right now, we're requiring them to buy our debt, and we're paying them interest on top of it. That doesn't sound like a good deal, right? Doesn't sound like a good deal at all. What's the alternative? Well, you have to buy it, but there's no interest. Okay, well now our interest expense goes, from our biggest line item right now, I believe, down to one of our lowest, right? Because you have no interest on the debt. Now, this presents some other challenges. It's not that clean, but there is a huge amount of that, which you could say we could just wipe off a huge amount of interest payments off that, and that will. I mean, if you think about, let me bring this up. So if you think about, so there's the debt clock. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. They just added the Doge clock on this for how much money is saved. But if you look at that, right? If you look at our debt, and where is our national debt? $36 trillion. That's kind of a lot, right? It's kind of a lot. I have to look through this to see where the interest on the debt is. Interest on the debt, $1 trillion net. So here are the line items: Medicare, Medicaid, 1.6 trillion, and you look at Social Security, almost 1.5 trillion. The Defense and War budget is 885 billion, which somehow I think there's probably a lot more that's stuck under the rug, but whatever. That's what it is. Interest on the debt is $1 trillion. That's a lot, right? That's quite a lot. And if you look at all the other line items, and we'll go through some of them, but you realize that that these other things are inconsequential in comparison. And let me bring some of these up. So here's some of them that we found these charts. I thought they were interesting. U.S. Department of Education used to be 33 billion. Now it's 251 billion. Number of employees really hasn't changed. Actually, the number of employees has shrank a little bit. And yet somehow we're paying out 251 billion to the Department of Education. Now, granted, I'm sure some of that is flowing through the states. I'm sure a lot of it is. But point being is, why don't you just decide what goes to the states? Why not just do it that way? Why go through, pay all this, and you got all this? I don't know the financials, so I'm not going to criticize, but I do know that it's gotten way out of hand. Here are the number of employees, federal employees being laid off, which I think we shared a few weeks ago. The SEC has the largest number of employees. I'm okay with the IRS being 67. I'd be okay if they let off everybody one person and just put it on computers. But then how would you, but then the problem comes because their job is basically to scare people into paying. That's the problem with the IRS. So if you don't have a bunch of people running around auditing people, then you're not scaring people. So I do empathize, although I don't like it. Government expenditures, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid's increasing quite a bit. Other, I don't know what that is, but anyway. So, all right. So anyway, what are your thoughts, Phil? I mean, they're going through with the machete, cleaning up the government. I don't know if it's all good or bad. It's nuanced, obviously, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on all this?
Look, there's certainly wasteful spending, and getting rid of it is a good thing. I just I'm not always sure that the way that they're going about doing it is the right way, but I don't know that I know what the right way is. Right? That's part of the problem. But and I know I feel for some of these people. Like I have clients that are government employees, and I can tell you that two of them already have reached out, and one, like, his job ends March 31st, and the other's like, I got an offer. What should I do? So people are affected by this. The level of efficiency of some of these jobs isn't that great. So I do think that I'll never forget back when I lived in Arizona. And by the way, Arizona doesn't follow daylight savings time. They just keep their clocks the same all year long. They don't change them, so we don't need it everywhere. And there's a reason that they don't do it, and it's because it's hot, and especially in southern Arizona. And so they'd rather start the day earlier and they take their afternoon siesta when it gets hotter, and then it makes them more productive by not using daylight savings time. But I'll never forget, there was a woman that worked in this office that I worked in, and she owed a lot in taxes. And so back then there were the stories about how the government was paying like $30 or $40 for ashtrays. So she put an ashtray in an envelope and said, "This is part of my debt." Of course, they didn't respond too well to that, but there's a lot of government waste. I understand that. So something needs to be done about it. Like I said, I don't know that they're going about it the best way. I don't know what the best way is, but there certainly is a lot of excess that needs to be cut out. That can happen in anywhere. And when you have the size of the debt that we have, and we have these big expenditures, you do have to look for places to cut.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think at this point, I mean, this is, if I had to read into it, Trump got elected because people were just sick of the status quo, right? He's a populist. That's how he got elected the first time. It's how he got elected this time, is the status quo isn't working. It's broken. We all know that. Even if you're a Democrat, the status quo is broken, right? You don't like it. Even if the Republicans were if it wasn't Trump, if it was like one of the Republican candidates, you'd be like, it'd probably be the status quo. You wouldn't like that either, right? So it's not necessarily the partisan part. It's just the status quo isn't working. And so I think even though they'll probably break stuff, and I guarantee they're going to break stuff. Like, you can't do what they're doing without breaking things. So if you look at like what Elon did with Twitter, right? He came in and fired everybody. And people are like, well, your company's going to go to zero. Yeah, but you fire everybody, and then somebody explained this to me, and I thought it was brilliant because he has a corporate background. He's like, well, no. He's like, what he did was brilliant. Here's why. Because if you've got 1,000 employees and you fire 990 of them, you figure out what breaks. And if something breaks, you hire somebody back for that thing. And another thing breaks, you hire somebody back for that thing. So then you realize where all the waste is, because if you don't, it's like if you have an assistant and then she goes on vacation or he goes on vacation, and then and then they come back and you realize like you didn't really need them. You're like, all right, you can take a permanent vacation because nothing broke while you were gone, right? So I'm not saying that's the answer, but that is how if you really want to slash and burn costs, like that's the kind of things you do. You just cut everything. You just say, all right, what's broken? We'll fix it, right? We'll hire somebody for that thing and for that thing and for that thing. And you hire back for what's needed. And then all the waste goes away because you just cut everything. Now, that guarantees things are going to break, right? And I'm not suggesting it's the best idea. I'm just saying it's an idea that a lot of smart people in corporate America do in order to reduce costs, especially if they're coming in and they just slash cost indiscriminately. They just cut everything, and then they just figure, all right, what can we hire back? I do want to share. So there's two things I want to share before we tag off, and well, actually one of them. So I'm going to mention this, and we'll come back to it next week. Is housing. Now, the housing market is really interesting right now. There's a lot of people talking about this, and it's still early, but early is the start of a trend, obviously. There's a lot more housing getting on the market right now, but there's a big, there's actually a big potential problem, a black swan in the mix in housing. And I'm going to leave everybody to we'll talk about it next week. I'll leave you on the edge of your seat because we have interest in time. But I can tell you that there is a big problem in housing right now, and it's akin to the subprime. Not as bad because that was more of a banking problem. This is not a banking problem necessarily, but it is a housing problem. So for those of you who think housing is unaffordable, this could be a potential win for you if you've been waiting to buy a house and you can't afford it. There could be something, and it depends on what part of the country you're in too. But I'll try to grab some of the charts for next week. But stay tuned for next week because we're going to get into this, because this is the kind of thing where you just say, all right, this is bad. Let's go sit in cash in the sidelines. I'm not saying everybody do that, but what do you see in Phil? Because we didn't get to the one point. I just remembered the one point we were supposed to hit. With the markets, you were talking about rotation. You want to touch on that and then wrap it up?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of things that have been going on, and from a rotation standpoint, like the biggest thing is the performance of all the stocks outside the US. Like I'm looking here, global stock market performance year to date. This is from Ed Yardeni report. And he says, I'm looking for the year to date numbers. 1 second. Among regional indexes, emerging market Europe is ahead of the pack year to date with a gain of 16.9%, followed by Europe 14.6%. EAFE, which is Asia and the Far East, is 10.3, EM Latin America 9.8, and then the worst performing region so far is emerging markets Asia, and emerging markets East Asia, but the U.S. is down 2%. So look at how all these, for years, people saying, it's been so long since international outperformed. Why do we still invest in international? And part of the reason that we have diversified portfolios is because we don't know what's going to happen. And look, a couple months does not make a long-term trend, but we're certainly seeing from a stock market performance, there's a big difference in terms of how the rest of the world outside the US are performing. I mean, and there's still some international weak spots too, but most of the world outside the US is outperforming the US. So that certainly is something that we haven't seen in a long time. And it'll be interesting to see if it continues. And then the other kind of rotation we're seeing within the market is, look, the NASDAQ's in a correction, and which means it's down more than 10%. And the NASDAQ is thought of as a much more technology heavy index, and technology stocks are underperforming. Healthcare stocks have been among the best, and healthcare stocks weren't. So we always have rotation in the market. I said this is only a couple months, but those things so far have been turning it, just like the growth versus value. And so we've had a little bit of value stocks and people looking for more quality because they're concerned about all the things going on, whether or not there's a recession, whether or not the market's going to go bad. I mean, I don't get that many emails from clients asking me or about the markets or with concern about the market, but the number that I have reached out has been up a little bit. There's people that are concerned, and in concern, that's where we have a flight to quality, and flight to quality oftentimes leads to these larger companies that pay dividends and things like that. And so we're seeing a little bit of a rotation in terms of what sectors are performing well, as well as in the geographic nature of what in the market's performing well, which is something that we haven't seen for a while. Like if you go back, we haven't seen it in the smaller caps, right? Those are still suffering. And we've talked about, I know you and I have talked about that on this show before, but in terms of what's going on globally, that does look like we could be beginning to see a market rotation in terms of international stocks outperforming US stocks, and the technology stocks, at least for now, are not doing nearly as well as they had. And like I said, the NASDAQ is in correction.
Yeah, you want to wrap us up here, Phil?
Sure. So when it comes to any of these things, I think the most important thing to remember is to pay attention to the news and make your own decisions. So let somebody else tell you what to do or do it. You want to make your own decisions. As for me, my firm is a Prize Wealth Management. I know that experiencing big life transitions can be stressful. My job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's a Prize Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. You can go to our website, which is apprisewealth.com. That's APPRISE wealth.com to sign up for our weekly blog or to schedule a free introductory call. Thanks for having me today, Kirk. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. I always enjoy having you here. And I will say that the interesting thing is I was kind of looking at the numbers this morning. They're not good for U.S. markets for sure. But I will say that what's interesting is if you look at what's happened this year so far, if you look at like the DAX, for instance, which nobody looks at, but that's up a lot this year. I mean, it's up like 10, 12%. It's like 10, 11% for the year. And meanwhile, you compare that to the U.S., which is, the numbers I gave you were, I think, from last week. So the markets are actually down another % or 2. Nasdaq's like 1.7 down. So you're already looking at 7.5% on the Nasdaq, and the S&P is probably closer to 3.5. So yeah, I mean, I think the one thing to keep in mind though, as we go through this rotation, is it's been kind of a while since we've had bad markets, and these aren't even bad. This is not even a bad market. This is a flat market. Yes, it's gone down a little bit, but if you think about it, like the S&P down 2%, that's like a daily volatility spike. That's nothing. Down 20 or 30, okay, now you got my attention. But like 2%, that's nothing. So I would just warn everybody just to be mindful. I think this year will be a relatively flat year. I think we'll see volatility for sure. But I would be shocked if we're up more than 7% this year, given what's going on now. I'd be really shocked. So I think people just need to keep in mind that, the markets are fluid. They will change, but don't keep all your money in the Mag 7, assuming it's going to go up forever, because right now that is a weak sector, and that could continue to be weak. And weak doesn't mean they're going to crash, by the way. It just means they might not grow. But then you might have value stocks that grow. You have international stocks. So there's a whole bunch of areas that most people don't invest in that maybe you should consider. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up for this week. We're going to get into next week, that big black swan event that we're going to reveal. Like I said, I'm still doing research on it, but it could be market moving. So definitely want to tune in while we talk about it. So that's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name is Kurt Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on the show. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and the podcast after you're choosing. You can also check out the show at MoneyTreePodcast.com. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Also, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. When you're there, please subscribe and leave a comment. Lastly, please leave your rating and comment to the podcast after your choice. Oh, and don't forget, do your own research. This show is for informational use only. We're not telling you what to think, merely how to think about investing. We're also not selling any products or services, so do not consider this advice. If you have any problems with the show, I blame Putin. Please send an email, express your feelings. If you're seeking financial advice, talk to an oracle or a fortune teller, or maybe just a licensed financial advisor. I'm one, but as I said earlier, I'm not selling anything. But I'm easy to find. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do. So invest in your life.